I've spent literal months trying to write a script about gender since probably around midsummer, and I cannot seem to find the right balance to it. Whether it's too personal or kind of cringy or potentially harmful, I've just been having a very difficult time wrapping my words around the subject. So let's talk about Hank Green instead. Aside from an absolutely remarkable thing, the single most influential piece of media Hank Green has injected into my brainwaves is this grainy, low audio quality, ridiculously titled Vlogs Brothers video from 2011. People have made assumptions about my gender and sexuality my entire life, and for far too long I reacted very negatively to that. Thanks to subcultures within subcultures that I existed within, I had been taught that any sort of non-normative gender or sexual or even identity expression was a very bad thing. This definitely led to some deep repression, not just about sexuality, but of just who I am in general. I felt constrained about my personality and how I could express myself because I was afraid of the assumptions other people would make about me, which is weird, but part of what I feel like made it so bad was just that I never saw people like me in media, which I understand is a wild thing for a straight white guy to say, but hear me out. I'm not as laden with biases as I once was, and thanks to YouTubers and friends and college, I've been able to look at myself and my identity with a little bit less of a biased lens now, and no, I'm not necessarily of a non-normative sexuality, but while I fit the actual definition of heterosexual, I don't feel like I fit the social definition of straight either. No, I'm not trans or non-binary, but I like tagging on that any label to my pronouns. Cis straight male is the best label we have to describe who and what I am, and yet it doesn't feel perfect. A friend suggested that I could consider myself gender non-conforming. I've heard the term demiguy thrown around, and an increasing number of people I respect use they them pronouns. No shade to people that use those terms, but I don't think I've quite reckoned enough with those to adopt them just yet. Despite sometimes wanting otherwise, I am, in fact, a guy. Transgender people often refer to their transition as something that is necessary for survival, something that living without was actually slowly killing them. That's not me. And knowing that makes me feel, at least in my admittedly biased perspective, that the issue is not with who I am, but with how narrowly defined masculinity in general is. Particularly in media, and particularly in the media that I consumed as a child, I feel like there is still a deep binary of masculinity between being the hypermasculine, stoic, emotionless, sacrificial hero, or the clearly and overly effeminate gay stereotype that is the butt of jokes. When I was in junior high, I came home from a birthday party, just drained. I told my dad that I could not wait until I was old enough that I didn't have to play American football when I hung out with friends. I hated football. I hated how angry people got. I hated how physical it was. I hated how everyone would pick on me and tell me how bad I was at it. And I especially hated that that was the only option I had to hang out with friends with. It always had to be football. My dad, in response, told me that I just needed to hang out with people that didn't play football. And thus, my friend group drastically shifted from being based around the other boys in my church and school to being almost exclusively with geeky, nerdy women. And it was so much better for me. We would talk about our feelings, about shows we loved. We played board games, and no one threw rocks at me. 10 out of 10 would recommend. This didn't help my questions and public perception around my identity, though. I was so deeply angry at the constrictions that had been placed around me as a male, and yet I was holding on to that label with a death grip, knowing that if I dared even think about letting go of it, I would be ostracized and labeled a lifelong sinner. Hank Green, based on this one 2011 video at least, seems to have had a somewhat similar experience.
I knew that being gay came along, at least theoretically, with several social cues. For example, if someone was a little bit more flamboyant than usual, if someone was a big fan of ice skating and really loved his collection of stuffed animals and hung out almost exclusively with girls but in a non-romantic way. Those social cues came along with homosexuality, and so I thought I might be gay. And this was scary for me because I really didn't want to be different. You know, I'm a kid, I'm 12 years old, and I'm worried about being different. And I'm like, I like ice skating to the Village People so much. This is a problem. And it sounds funny, but it isn't. It's not funny for a lot of reasons. One, because someone can be so afraid of what they might be. Two, because just because you like guys getting to the village people doesn't mean anything about your sexual orientation. So it turns out that I'm not gay. What I am is kind of effeminate. I'm just sort of a less guyish kind of guy.
Here's the thing. I get a little starstruck when it comes to YouTubers, and when I fantasize about bumping into Hank Green in a grocery store or asking him a question at a panel, I really don't care about the amazing humanitarian work, environmental advocacy, or ethical business practices he has. I want to know about his gender. I mean, all that other stuff is really important and is far greater than anyone's individual expression of identity, but I am just so fascinated at how this guy, this dude, who I super look up to as a creative, has a really similar gendered experience to me. Like, how cool is that? In actually looking for it, I've seen this quote-unquote new flavor of masculinity all over the place. And there are lots of role models that could be pulled from, not the least of which one being is my own dad. It turns out that you can be both a man and not be super down with emotionalist attachment. It's not new, and it's not only manifested by William Henry Green over here. And as it turns out, you can have gender role models that aren't strictly the same gender as you. It's fine. Nobody's going to stop you, and I think you can learn a lot that way. But masculine identifying individuals with, for lack of a better term, a soft version of masculinity does feel like the exception rather than the norm still. And Hank Green was one of the first real-life modern-day examples I ever encountered of it, so he had a pretty strong impact on me. Gender is a spectrum, and so is sexuality. I think few people truly wholly fit under one label or the other. And so it seems so terribly wrong to me that a performance of masculinity focused on unironic enthusiasm and empathy is considered abnormal enough to make young boys have to question and grapple with their identity for fear of being ostracized because they liked stuffed animals, the village people, and having close platonic relationships with women. At the end of the day, Hank Green is just a human, like the rest of us, but I've found him to be an incredible role model for masculinity. Crying when you're emotionally touched, leading with empathy, recognizing your mistakes and failures, reflecting on your privilege, and using it to uplift people and voices. Those are all really cool things, and I'm glad to have had his voice as part of my youthful cacophony of media as someone I could relate to. Things have happened recently that have made me very upset. And at least part of that anger has been directed at gender, at patriarchy, at men. I don't know the capital S solution to dismantling systems of oppression and patriarchy, and I don't think anyone really does. But I like to think that empathetic voices and soft gendered expressions like Hank Green's seriously help. They've seriously helped me, at least. Hey, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, then you probably were interested in the subject, and if that's the case, then I highly recommend this book written by Liz Plank. It's a feminist perspective on masculinity, and also kind of acts as an introductory guide to how feminism helps everyone, and not just one gender. Also, I don't know if this is like a typical video for me. I have no idea what a typical video is, but if you liked it, subscribe, like, stick around. We'll see what happens together.